The first rule of survival on Rewrote was simple: never trust the silence. The second rule was harder to live by: never grow attached to anything that breathes. Khalees broke both rules before the cold season ended. She lived alone, not because she wanted to, but because the state had declared her presence too dangerous for the rest of the galaxy. The official reason for her exile was unauthorized genetic convergence with memory-reactive flora, which was a sanitized way of saying you made plants that can feel. Khalees didn't call it convergence. She called it care. The greenhouse she built from the ruins of a decommissioned mining dome lay nestled in a scar of pale rock, half covered by frost and starlight. She kept no company, save for the flora she'd coaxed into life with fingers and grief. Some bloomed only in darkness. Others opened only when spoken to. The state had tried to silence her once. But life kept whispering through seed and root. In the mornings, she moved barefoot across the moss beds, her skin chilled by dew and shaded glow. The violet horn reached for her as she passed, its fronds brushing against her thigh in affection. The spiriflax released slow tendrils of scent memory, clouding the air with a phantom hush that reminded her of laughter she hadn't heard in years. It was a quiet existence, not peaceful, but deliberate. Then came the anomaly. At first, she thought it was a storm forming on the horizon. Revitha's magnetic storms never knocked politely. But it wasn't thunder that lit the sky that night. It was metal streaking through atmosphere, burning hot, tumbling wrong. She saw the craft crash beyond the ridge, where the old observatory used to sit before it was swallowed by ice. She waited 2 days before investigating. Not because she feared what she'd find, but because she feared what she might feel. The wreckage was barely visible, half buried in powder and dust. Twisted steel, scorched plating, no insignia. A shuttle, small and fast. Not military, but fast enough to have stolen something important. He was lying face down in the snow, one leg bent at an angle that made her stomach turn. The blood had already frozen into his coat. He was still breathing. Khalees crouched beside him, brushed snow from his cheek, and pressed her fingers to his pulse. He murmured something in his sleep. The words sounded like sorry. She sighed, as if disappointed in herself, and whispered, "You idiot." He awoke in her greenhouse under a canopy of bioluminescent vines. His eyes fluttered open slowly, searching shapes in the air, as though he wasn't sure which reality he'd landed in. "Don't move," she said softly. "Your leg is shattered. I reset it, but you'll need rest." He blinked. "Where am I?" "Rewrote." His brow creased. "That's exile class." "Yes," she said. "It is." "Then you're an exile. Like you, apparently." He tried to sit up, but winced immediately. Khalees was already beside him, adjusting the woven support brace and placing a fresh filter over his nose. "Breathe this," she said. "Sleep root vapor. Helps with the pain." He obeyed. Silence fell again, broken only by the rhythm of her footsteps and the soft rustle of growing things. "What's your name?" she asked after a long pause. He hesitated, then said, "Selvin." She nodded. "Don't lie to me again." His mouth parted, but no sound came. "You're not military, and your ship didn't crash by accident. Whatever reason brought you here, it's your business. But you're under my roof now. And I don't tolerate liars." Selvin's eyes lingered on her face, studying the tired lines, the streaks of soil on her cheeks, the steel in her gaze. "Thank you," he said eventually. She returned to her work table without responding. They fell into a rhythm after that. Khalees didn't speak unless she needed to. Selvin, weak and fevered, drifted in and out of sleep, his dreams filled with strange fragments, someone calling his name in panic, a fire closing in, the sound of pages burning. He watched her sometimes, quietly, as she tended to the plants. She moved with purpose, each gesture efficient, but there was softness in the way she held the roots. Like she was apologizing for hurting them. Like she remembered what it felt like to be torn from the ground. "These plants," he said once, "they move when you talk." "They remember," she replied, not looking up. "I bred them that way." "How?" "Through sound pollination. They respond to frequency, tone, emotion." He reached toward a blue-bellied vine near his bed. It coiled lazily around his fingers, emitting a scent like saltwater and clove. "That smell," he said. "It reminds me of someone." She said nothing. Didn't have to. He understood. The days blurred. Time didn't pass so much as unravel. Selvin began to help where he could, moving slowly, wrapping leaves, drying roots. He wasn't used to silence, but Khalees made it less lonely. He told her little, only that he had been a storyteller once, traveling from system to system, trading tales for fuel and food. She didn't ask what changed. He didn't ask why she never left the greenhouse. Sometimes they would sit at night under the open dome, the stars visible through the warped glass. He told her stories, not official histories, but secret ones. Stories of forgotten gods and rebels who planted seeds in tyrants' gardens. She never laughed. But her eyes would narrow slightly in interest. And sometimes, when he touched her hand by accident, she didn't pull away. "You should have died," she said once, quietly. He looked up from a tray of pollen-slick seed pods. "You were barely breathing. No ID, no beacon. Nothing but a blood-stained data scroll." He said nothing. "Why were you running?" "Because the truth scares people more than lies." Her lips pressed together. "So you're a traitor." "Only to those who write the official stories." She sat across from him, fingers laced. "What was on the scroll?" "My last story," he said. "A story they didn't want heard." "Why give it to me?" He smiled, tired. "Because if anyone could understand it, it'd be someone who taught plants how to remember grief." That night, she showed him the sorrow leaf. It was a small bloom, soft gold with plum edges, growing near the east vents. She clipped one, gently, and placed it in his palm. "Smell." He did. His breath caught. "It smells like my brother." "That's what it does." "How?" "It holds emotional memory signatures. It mirrors the person you long for most." He turned the flower over in his hand, stunned. "You grew this?" "I grew it the year they took my daughter." His head snapped toward her, but she looked past him, into the dark. "They said I poisoned her mind. Taught her to feel too deeply. Too much grief is a threat, apparently." He didn't say he was sorry. He just reached across the table and touched her hand. She didn't move away. He kissed her that night, just once. It wasn't a question or a declaration. It was a moment, soft, breathless, human. She let him. He slept beside her after that. Not every night. Just the ones when the wind screamed loudest, and even the plants seemed to curl inward. She didn't ask him to stay. And he didn't ask for forever. But for the first time in years, Khalees didn't feel like a ghost in her own skin. Until the alarm sounded. They came at dawn. One transport, unmarked. It landed just outside the ridge, silent and deliberate. Selvin stood at the window, already dressed. "They're here for me." "I know. I should go." "No. Khalees. They won't find you." She moved quickly, stashing his scroll beneath the false floor in her seed library. She sprayed the air with masking pollen, dimmed the photogrow lights, and sat at her bench, waiting. They knocked. She answered. A woman in black stepped inside. Young. Polite. Eyes like knives. "You've had visitors," the woman said. "No. We're tracking a fugitive. Last known coordinates place him near this ridge." "Then your coordinates are broken." The woman stepped forward. "Scan the room." Paused near the sorrel leaf. These are unauthorized strains. They're mine. They grow only here. What do they remember? Khalees tilted her head. Would you like to find out? The woman narrowed her eyes, then turned. If you see him, she said, you're legally required to report. If I see him, Khalees replied, I'll remember. They left. The greenhouse held its breath for an hour. Then Selvin stepped out from behind the flowering wall. She was at the table, staring at the scroll. They'll come back, she said. He nodded. Then I'll go. Not tonight. He hesitated. She stood. Walked to him. And kissed him like the frost wouldn't return. The first time Selvin lied to save his life, he'd been 13. He had told the warden of the state orphanage that he didn't remember the names of the books his mother read aloud before bed. He said he never even knew her name. It was a lie. Her voice lived in every story he later told. Her name lived in the middle of his chest, next to the anger he never spoke aloud. But lies, when used carefully, were like lockpicks. They didn't fix anything, but they opened doors. Now, as he stood in the greenhouse dome beneath the golden breath of a sorrel-leaf bloom, he wondered if the biggest lie he had told was to himself. That he could leave Khalees behind. He should have left already. The moment the enforcer stepped foot on the frost, every second after was a risk. But he hadn't gone. Not yet. Not after her mouth had formed around the words I won't lose another thing I love. The sentence had pressed itself into his lungs like gravity. Now he couldn't breathe anywhere else but here. He tried to sleep. He couldn't. He slipped from the bed where she slept, curled like a comma in the blanket. Outside the dome, night painted the ice in a sheen of soft indigo. The sorrel-leaf vines glowed faintly along the vents. He sat beneath them and opened his scroll. The story within was written in invisible ink. Not metaphorically, literally. Ultraviolet reactive scripts, encoded with subharmonic tremor data and framed like allegory. To a casual reader, it was a myth about an extinct race of skyfishers who pulled memory fragments from dying stars. To the right eyes, though, it was something else entirely. Coordinates of forgotten camps. Names of those the regime had disappeared. Proof that memory-tuned plants could be used to recover suppressed historical truth. Khalees had discovered it first. He had stolen the idea from her research before they erased her work from the archives. That was the other truth he hadn't told her yet. He never meant to steal. But her work had reached him like a ghost, an echo through forgotten data shards, and he had known instantly that the state would burn it before they understood it. So he ran with it. And that made him a traitor. But he hadn't expected to find her still alive. He hadn't expected to fall in love with her. Now the guilt tangled with the affection in his chest like starvine, painful and beautiful. He heard her footsteps approach behind him. You're not sleeping, she said. Neither are you. She sat beside him, legs crossed, shawl draped across her shoulders. You're planning to leave. He didn't answer. It's okay, she said. I don't want you to stay if it kills you. He looked at her. The scar across her chin. The way her fingers folded neatly over her knees. There was strength in her silence. Grace in her restraint. You deserve to be remembered, he said. You deserve to be forgiven, she replied. He swallowed. I have to tell you something. She turned to him, waiting. Your research. Your encoded plant work. I found fragments of it 5 years ago. I used it to build my archive. The story. The myth. Her eyes didn't blink. I never knew your name then. Not really. The files were partial. They burned most of it before I could trace it. I didn't come here to betray you. But you did, she said. Her voice didn't carry anger. Only fact. He looked away. Yes. They sat in silence. Then, finally, she said, "You made it mean something. You didn't sell it. You told it. I tried. Then don't apologize. Just finish it." He stayed 5 more days. Not because it was safe, but because neither of them knew how to say goodbye in a language they hadn't built yet. They touched like people who weren't sure if the next moment would exist. Their intimacy wasn't fire, it was warmth, steady and pulsing. The kind that lingered in skin long after it ended. He taught her to encode stories the way he did, through rhythm, light pulses, and microtone variations. She taught him to communicate with the memory blooms without touching them, just using breath and patience. They were not lovers in the conventional sense. They were survivors sharing a quiet miracle. On the 6th morning, he kissed her without a word and left through the frost gate. The scroll was no longer hidden. It was in her hands now. She watched him vanish into the glare of white wind, and he didn't look back. It was better that way. But gods, it still hurt. He wandered for 4 months across barren moons and forgotten ports. Sometimes he told stories in market stalls to buy food. Other times he passed as a ghost, taking transport in freight hulls and sleeping under smuggled blankets. He kept Khalees in his thoughts like a fire in winter. Not burning. Not wild. Just necessary. He didn't tell anyone her name. He didn't use the scroll. Not yet. He waited for the right moment. And it came in a bar on Vadal Orbit 3, where the air tasted of rust and old lies. He was reciting a tale, softly, rhythmically, about a girl who could hear the past in petals, when someone in the crowd stopped smiling. A young woman with a stiff braid and eyes that remembered too much. When the story ended, she followed him to the back corridor. "Where did you learn that tale?" she asked. He shrugged. "From someone who knew how to grow truth." She stepped forward. "You used her signature. The old tone code." "Khalees." His throat tightened. "You knew her?" he asked. "I'm her daughter." Her name was Marin. She should have hated him. He had expected rage, accusation, fury. But instead, she asked him, "Is she alive?" And when he said yes, her eyes went glassy. "I thought they killed her. They told me she was a traitor. They told me the same thing." Marin leaned against the wall. "I thought I wanted revenge. But maybe I just want to hear her voice." Selvin handed her the scroll. "This is your inheritance. Not mine." She took it like someone holding the last fragment of a dream. "I don't know how to read this," she said. "Then let me show you." And so, Selvin stayed. They spent the next weeks hidden in the lower stacks of the archivist quadrant, where dusty coils of memory tape and translation codecs still clung to their final fragments of forbidden knowledge. Marin was fierce. Brilliant. Colder than her mother, but burning inside. She didn't know how to trust, but she knew how to fight for meaning. Selvin watched her grow into herself as they decoded the rest of the story together. Each verse uncovered a piece of her mother's voice. Each rhythm exposed a wound the regime had tried to bury. They laughed. Not often. But they did. Once, after solving a particularly tangled encoding layer, Marin smiled at him. Not a soft smile, no, this one was wide and reckless. "I see why she let you stay," she said. He raised a brow. "Because I'm charming. Because you're a good listener." He grinned. "Same thing." She rolled her eyes. But the silence between them was warm. The day they tried to upload the scroll to the resistance channel, the floor above them exploded. Selvin covered Marin with his body as fire rained from the ceiling. They survived. Barely. Someone had tracked the signal. Someone knew. In the darkness of the burning stacks, Selvin pressed her hand to his heart. "Run," he whispered. "They're coming. Not without you." "Yes," he said. "Without me." She'll never forgive me. She will. Because I already do. He kissed her forehead and shoved her through the crumbling tunnel to the outer hatch. She looked back once. He smiled. And then the wall fell. They didn't find a body. Just a scorch mark. And a vine, curled in ash. The first sorrow leaf to ever grow outside of Rewrote. The first time Maren was taught how to forget, she was 9. They took her into a cold room beneath the Academy of Memory Regulation, where the walls pulsed with low pink light and the air smelled like old ash and lavender. An official stood by a polished steel console, smiling without warmth. "Hold still," he said. "This won't erase everything. Just the parts that hurt." They told her her mother had betrayed the state. That she'd tampered with dangerous biology. That her research had made people feel too much. They didn't say what happened to her afterward. They said only, "You are not her." The machine hummed. Her memories curled in on themselves, growing hazy. But something refused to vanish. A smell. The scent of damp soil. Of roots warmed under glass. And a woman's hand, placing a soft yellow flower behind her ear. Maren never forgot that. Not entirely. Years passed. She trained as a memory archivist, because they told her she must, because it kept her under the state's watch and gave her access to the machines that had tried to hollow her out. She got good at pretending. They thought she had become useful. Instead, she became patient. Selvin wasn't supposed to be real. He was a whisper in outlaw circles, a wandering storyteller with encoded tales that made listeners cry without knowing why. When she heard the sorrow leaf myth at the Vadal Orbit Station, something inside her snapped into place. Her mother's breath. Her mother's hands. She followed Selvin into the corridor, demanding answers. And when he said the name Khalees, alive, something inside her cracked open like sunlight through frost. She didn't forgive him right away. But she didn't leave either. Because for the first time in over a decade, someone hadn't looked at her like a record to be wiped clean. They worked in shadows. Underground chambers, forgotten tunnels, abandoned shelves of state-banned scrolls, all became their home. Selvin was different from the rebels she knew. He didn't yell. Didn't burn. He built. He spoke in careful phrases and poetic symbols. When he smiled, it was always a little sad. Maren found herself smiling back, sometimes without meaning to. Once, they argued over syntax. "It should say we bloomed, not we burned," Selvin said, pointing to the encoded phrasing. "Blooming sounds weak," she countered. "Burning means they couldn't stop us. Blooming means we survived," he said. "And made something beautiful." She stared at him. "You sound like her." "So do you," he said quietly. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Days turned strange. Nights grew closer. One evening, they found an old listening pod deep inside the archive ruins, still intact, with starlight leaking through the broken dome. Selvin played a recording of a voice, a woman whispering a nursery rhyme. It wasn't Khalees, but the melody made Maren's eyes sting. Selvin looked at her, soft and open. "You okay?" "No," she said, voice cracking. "But I want to be." He reached across the space between them and brushed her hand with his fingers. She didn't pull away. That night, they fell asleep in the old pod, pressed shoulder to shoulder, listening to nothing but their breathing. After the fire, the blast, the betrayal, the ash, Maren ran. She didn't want to. She wanted to stay. But Selvin had pushed her into the escape chute, and she had lived. He had not. She carried the scroll in her chest now. She didn't dare touch it for days. It felt like blood and sorrow. But eventually, she unrolled it, trembling, and looked at the words he'd trusted her with. And they whispered. Not with sound. But with memory. She fled to the outer aisles of the Tevran belt, where tech went to die and information passed only through whispers. She found an old hacker named Siren with burned hands and a broken voice, who traded her fuel in exchange for poetry. "You're the daughter of the Blue Maker," Siren said, one mechanical eye blinking slowly. "And his flame." "I don't know what I am," Marin muttered. Then be the story they tried to erase. They rebuilt a transmitter in the skeleton of an old Stargate. Siren risked his life to get it stable. Marin fed it every line she had decoded. Every verse her mother had buried in pollen. Every myth Selvin had sung in soft tones. Every line they wrote together. When the machine lit up in starlight and began to pulse, she whispered into it. "I am Marin, daughter of Khalees. I carry a story of truth, love, and roots that refuse to die." And she sent it out. Everywhere. The state tried to intercept it. Too slow. The coalition caught it first. Archivists in exile decoded it. Memory painters in the outer moons echoed it. Illegal seeds bloomed in terraformed domes where flowers had never dared grow. Khalees's name returned to the lexicon of innovators. Selvin's name became legend. Marin became a ghost with a flame in her hand. She didn't know if her mother would receive the signal. She didn't know if Selvin had truly died. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw the iris-colored sky above the Stargate dome, the way the stars blinked in time with the scroll's last verse. Truth does not shout, it blooms. And she kept walking. Because hope, like roots, grows in the dark first. The first time they saw Marin, she was smudged with ash and reading outlawed language through tears. She sat in the ruined shell of a memory hall on Norran orbit, surrounded by broken scroll reels and coils of burned plast. He should have turned away. His post was temporary, he was only here to assess damage to the state's archival wreckage, not get involved. But something in the way she touched the scroll with reverence, like it was a relic or a wound, made him hesitate. So instead of reporting her, he sat down beside her and said, "You know that scroll's tagged with old trace code, right?" She didn't flinch. "I'm counting on it," she said. They had no idea why he laughed. Maybe because it was the first honest thing he'd heard in weeks. He wasn't meant to fall in love with a traitor's daughter. He wasn't meant to steal access codes. Or break into the forbidden Bloom files. Or help her amplify a signal carrying outlawed story tone encodings. But Marin didn't ask him to fall. She just spoke with fire behind her grief, and he followed. They was not brave. He knew that. He grew up in the Hall of State Recorders, trained to copy truth without asking why it was shaped a certain way. He kept his head down. He filed what he was told. He believed in rules because rules kept things quiet. Then Marin showed him a scroll written in blooming code, and silence stopped feeling like safety. "Why are you helping me?" she asked once, after they'd broken into a relay gate and narrowly avoided security drones. He didn't have a good answer. So he gave the only one he had. "Because I want to remember something that isn't sterile." She had blinked at that. And then, to his shock, she smiled. She was messy and brilliant and stubborn. When she translated her mother's phrases into rhythmic pulses, she did it by humming under her breath. When she cried, she hid it behind sarcasm. They started watching her mouth more than the scrolls. The way she formed words, bit down on emotion, softened vowels when speaking her mother's name. Khalees. The woman they had both built from fragments. The woman they had never met, but felt like he owed something to. Because Khalees had planted this war in they's heart. And he was finally ready to lose it. The first time Marin kissed him, it wasn't romantic. It was a dare. They had just barely escaped a data trap in the Coalition's outer border, and they was panting, blinking ash out of his eyes, saying, "We almost died." She just looked at him and said, "So?" He shrugged. "I'm still here." "That deserves something," she said. Then she leaned in and kissed him. It was fast. Wild. full of leftover fear. But it made his whole chest ache. "Was that a thank you?" he asked afterward. "It was a mistake," she said, eyes sharp. He didn't believe her. They didn't talk about it for days. But the tension between them softened. Shifted. Turned quiet. He began to understand that love didn't have to shout. Didn't have to declare itself. It just stayed. Even when the world tried to burn it out. And she stayed. She sat beside him when he decoded blood-stained lines from the Sorrow Leaf legend. She pulled him away from terminal screens when his eyes blurred from fatigue. And one night, she held his hand in silence while they listened to a playback of Selvin's voice. "Do you miss him?" they asked quietly. "Every day," she said. "But I don't want to rewrite it. I just want to finish it." He squeezed her hand. She didn't let go. They were found 3 days later. Not by drones. By people. The kind who spoke softly and carried knives. The state didn't like that the story was spreading. They'd given up trying to erase Khalees. But now they wanted to erase her daughter. And whoever helped her. They was dragged from their hideout by force. Marin screamed his name until her voice cracked. He couldn't fight back, he wasn't strong. But he was smart. He bit down hard on his own tongue and spat blood across a control console as they dragged him past. The code embedded in his blood unlocked the last sequence. The one that would send her location to the Bloomnet. The one that might bring Khalees home. They imprisoned Day in a hollow satellite. No light. No contact. But he remembered her voice in the dark. She had said, "We finish this, no matter what." So he waited. Not for rescue. But for Bloom. He had no idea how long he was there before it happened. A tremor in the hull. A crackle of static. Then light poured in. And a woman stepped through the door, wrapped in root-braided fabric and light dust on her skin. Her eyes were Khalees's eyes. She didn't speak. She just held out her hand. They took it. And smiled.